Hello everyone, my name is Shu Ping and I'm a Senior Research Assistant with Hong Kong University, but I spent many years at the SPCA in Hong Kong. Very glad to be here. Thank the organizers for putting together a really inspiring program with so many committed people like Giles. I can hear the passion in his voice too. So some background about this study and acknowledgements. So the data in this study was actually made possible from a database that was built by a small team of us when I was at the SPCA Hong Kong. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues, Chief Inspector Yong Chi Hang and Animal Receiving Supervisor Mandy Wong. I would also like to thank the nice people who gave us money for this analysis. And also, I think my co-authors, Dr. Fiona Woodhouse and Professor Amanda Whitford, are in this room and are very excited to answer any questions you might have. So, some background on the data. The SPCA Inspectorate runs a 24-hour hotline, and we handle over 30,000 calls a year, of which 1,000 might be related to animal cruelty. So we also assist the police, customs, and the agricultural, fisheries, and conservation department. Approximately 30 cases go to court annually. So the majority of these studies in this case are with the police, and we looked through 600 cases over this period to analyze the cases that we felt had sufficient reasons to proceed to court, the types of offenses, any patterns to offending, and some reasons why they did not proceed to a full-blown prosecution. So we can see here we have active maltreatment, cases where there was traumatic physical injury to animals, passive neglect, where animals were neglected or left to suffer due to ignorance, lack of timely action, or abandonment, commercial exploitation, cases where commercial gain is involved. So we have breeders, groomers, animal trainers. And we also have cases to do with hoarding, where a defendant keeps animals, especially in large numbers, but is overwhelmed and does not have the resources to care for them, and/or they do not recognize that they do not have the resources to look after these animals in an appropriate fashion. So hoarding and animal sheltering in Hong Kong is very intertwined because hoarders can call themselves animal shelters, and they take on resources and animals rescued by volunteers, but they keep the animals in very poor condition. And another type of case that we see a lot are where poison is suspected to be involved, but the conviction rate is very low, as well as trapping. So this is where traps are involved. Okay, of the 150 cases that did result in prosecutions, most cases had one defendant. If they had two, it was often because there were two owners. These are the categories with significant number of cases. In 75% of prosecutions for active maltreatment or neglect-related cruelty, defendant was male. There's no gender bias in hoarding cases, and the defendant's age ranged from 21 to 62 years of age. However, where animals were also abandoned, two or more animals were also abandoned or left behind after defendants moved in cases of passive neglect, the offenders were often very young, often in their 20s. During this study, only one company was brought to court. So, animal species by case typology. Who is at risk? We found that dogs are at risk, especially non-pedigree mixed breed dogs, which are kept in large numbers, be it in shelters or people just owning large numbers of personal pets. Mixed breed dogs were also most vulnerable to acts of violence and passive neglect. Pedigree dogs were most at risk in commercial activities such as breeding, training, and grooming. For other species, For other species, they include things like guinea pigs, rabbits, hamsters, as well as wild animals such as birds and wild boar. Pigeons and doves in particular, like in the first photo, are very prone to acts of violence that result in death. We had 5 cases where birds were beaten to death or attacked with weapons. We also had a lot of turtles being hurt. So this is one of the bigger cases where the only defendant was a company, so the company controlled a temple. The temple had a pond with 43 terrapins, including some endangered species. So the turtles were used to attract luck donations from the public, and the pond had been drained totally dry. 38 turtles were found in very poor conditions, and 5 animals had died. And in another particular case, which you could see on the right, 10 turtles were found stabbed with pencils down their throats. And in another very tragic incident, a turtle was thrown from a flat during an argument. Okay. So, more numbers. Okay, so the background to this, these are some of the sentences imposed for the major types of cruelty. So some background, Chapter 169 is the Animal Cruelty Ordinance of Hong Kong. It is tried at Hong Kong's lowest court, which is the Magistrates Court, with a maximum prison term of 3 years and a maximum fine of $25,000. So these penalties were actually increased in part due to public pressure in 2006. However, there was not much of a trickle down. So the average sentence imposed for the worst examples of animal cruelty during this period remained very close to an analysis done by some of my co-authors in 2007 and 2008 at 2.4 months of imprisonment. If we remove those cases where there are related charges like possession of an offensive weapon, the sentence is actually dropped further and it remains the same as in 2007 and 2008, which is 2 months imprisonment. We also notice that neglect is not to be seen on par in terms of sentencing as active maltreatment and commercial cases where you are more likely to get a prison sentence. Despite the numbers of animals involved, as well as the degree of suffering, commercial and active acts of cruelty are more likely to be dealt with imprisonment. Even when neglect is at extreme, like hoarding, it's not clear that prosecution or magistrates understand the impact of animal suffering. From our observations of sentencing in court, being an animal lover and taking strays in is a measure of good character and is often used as a defense, and especially in earlier cases accepted by magistrates. So there is a comparison because this is actually changing. So one example is a hoarding case in 2013 where there were 95 dogs in poor conditions, over 20 dead bodies, and the defendant, a lady, got community service order of 160 hours. But in 2019, we had another case involving 100 animals, also with over 20 deaths, but the defendant received 10 months of imprisonment. Okay, so active maltreatment. In 24% of the cases involving traumatic injury, family members targeted other family members, pets or neighbors, or people in their village, and of these 63 cases of active maltreatment, 19 involved animals that had to be killed or euthanized within 24 hours, that had been killed or had to be euthanized within 24 hours due to their injuries. And so, but this is also a note, because this was interesting, because while violence towards animals, we don't condone that, that's not great. 7 cases involved neighbors attacking dogs kept by others for reportedly causing annoyance by barking or having had a previous negative experience with dogs that were permitted to roam by their owners. In 4 cases, defendants had approached these dog owners and urged them to keep their dogs under control or manage their behavior. In one case, there was a dim sum chef who had to wake up at 4 a.m. every morning. He had complained to the dog owner. He reported to the authorities regarding the dog's barking repeatedly for almost 6 years. He attacked the dog with a scythe, which is like a large knife, and he was sentenced to 2 months imprisonment. The main reasons why cases are not pursued to prosecution for active maltreatment was that the offender could not be located by the police, or evidence of physical injury could not be detected at time of examination. So for passive neglect, in 41 cases of this category, animals were found inside private premises with no food or water. In some cases, their owners claimed they were planning to return, and the animal was not abandoned. 17 out of 61 cases involved animals which had died before discovery or required euthanasia due to their state. Often we get reports from landlords trying to claim rent or concerned neighbors and animal rescue volunteers. So, as I mentioned earlier, one surprising finding was that many of these people who had left animals behind were actually in their early 20s. Hong Kong is a renting culture, and many people rent, and many of these people, young people, had multiple animals. So of those who that were managed to be prosecuted, many cited financial problems such as job loss, family problems, so they were overwhelmed by caregiving obligations, children, sick family members. 2 cases was due to the owners actually being detained by authorities, one by the police and the other detained in hospital under a hospital order due to non-cruelty related issues. So this is a consideration must be given to the development of educational responses and practical mechanisms which could encourage owners to act more responsibly and surrender their animals when they can no longer care for them. Okay, so what you might be wondering, what is this failure to proceed thing? So as I mentioned, cruelty is currently tried in the Magistrates Court, which means there's a 6-month limit or time bar to identify, lay charges, and fine the owner. If you fail, and if the charge is not brought to court, the suspect can no longer be prosecuted. But you can lay a charge, even if, as long as the suspect is identified, and they may not be present. And when this happens, the time limit no longer applies. However, sometimes this is not done by the police. We also found that in many cases, there's a heavy reliance to prove there are physical signs of injury or very clear signs of suffering that can be documented. Mental suffering is not fully recognized without extensive report by our veterinary behaviorists, but Hong Kong legislation does not really require this if there are sufficient grounds to show this, that the circumstances may cause animal suffering. Okay. All right, so more numbers. Sorry. This is a range of maximum and minimum penalties by year. So it's just also an illustration of the kind of cases that we get in Hong Kong, and sentencing can be very disparate. So I'm going to verbally give you some examples of animal abuse that get the heaviest sentences in Hong Kong. In fourth place, 6 months prison. 2017, so 2 inmates in a drug addiction treatment center, they beat and killed a dog that had been entrusted to their care as part of their rehab. 2018, another man who breached his initial probation order, he was also imprisoned for 6 months for beating a dog with a golf club, a dog that was tied outside a shop with a golf club for almost a minute. In third place, 7 months prison. In 2017, bestiality, a man was convicted with having sex with a dog. The dog was found by a dog feeder with injuries to its anus, and it was brought to a vet where this case was reported. In 2013, a man strangled a cat by dragging it back and forth and then beat it to death with a wooden stake. Second place, so 10 months prison. 2019, a man who was running a shelter filled with 146 starving and sick animals, he was given 10 months prison. 36 of these animals had died before volunteers could raise the alarm. And in first place, 12 months. A man who put a cat inside a carton, then using a long nylon string, he tied up the cat. He then dragged the cat around and threw the cat up and down the air for about 4 hours, and it was captured on CCTV. 2017, also 12 months prison. A man left 18 dogs and a cat locked inside a house without food and water for 2 weeks, so 10 dogs died. 2018, man, again, abandonment, left 12 dogs and 5 turtles in his house after losing his job and girlfriend. So 6 dogs starved to death. So if you notice, like, the maximum is 12, the highest imprisonment sentence at this point is 12 months. This is actually 1/3 of the maximum imprisonment sentence of 3 years. And we also have some observations regarding other cases, like prolonged beatings of dogs. The sentencing is a little bit inconsistent. So in 2018, a man kicks a dog that was tied up in an alley. He kicks it 10 times over the head and eyes. He gets 10 weeks imprisonment. 2017, a man beats a dog repeatedly with a plastic pipe for barking, captured on CCTV. He gets no imprisonment, community service order, 160 hours. Then we have the dog trainer who repeatedly hit a dog he was training with a metal pipe, also captured on CCTV, reported by his boss. He gets community service order, 120 hours. We also found that animals other than dogs and cats have significantly lower sentences. So only 3 other cases for these other species had a prison sentence. So there was one guy, the case with pencils and turtles, he got convicted for 4.5 months for stabbing 10 turtles with pencils. These were turtles that were in the public pond of a public hospital. And a man got 6 weeks imprisonment for beating a pigeon to death. Another man got 4 weeks imprisonment for pouring boiling water on a rabbit. And for the turtle that got thrown from a building, that person got 1 week imprisonment. However, we also noticed there's a discrepancy. So one example, it's called bindover. So meaning that no punishment would be received if this person doesn't commit a similar offense during a period of time. So a man burned a rat alive in a trap, and he received a 6-month bindover. And that means, if he does not do this again within 6 months, there were no repercussions. And the magistrate ordered that the trap be returned to him. But in 2019, we did also see there's a reason for hope, where an eyewitness had seen a defendant attacking a pigeon. And prosecutors also recommended a bindover, but the magistrate said she didn't understand why this was happening because she warned the defendant verbally that he had committed a serious offense. Okay, so, all right, so this is an example of, enforceable duty of care. So these are things that are happening in Hong Kong. So in 2019, after much lobbying, thank you, the Hong Kong government conducted a public consultation on drafting a duty of care legislation. So currently, it has to be proven that there's a harm or considerable harm has occurred before the police are confident to move forward with the case. Sometimes SPCA our inspectors do not have legal powers, and they will visit potential defendants multiple times. And until the situation is deemed serious enough, it might be difficult to call in the police and to start the entire police investigation process. And then if it is serious enough, the animal may be seized and then kept until the investigation is over. And the length of stay where prosecution animals stay with us is about 5 months, 220-something days. So this is an example. 12 dogs were abandoned in a village house. 4 of the dogs had died, and their bodies had already decomposed. These are their remaining friends. Prior to this, the landlord had pursued the tenant for rent for over 5 months with no success. And the case could not be proceeded because the tenant could not be located within the 6-month time bar. So with duty of care legislation, it focuses on the needs and obligations of owners to meet them before the extent of cruelty has occurred. So one of the suggestions was introducing things like improvement notices that are also used in jurisdictions like UK and New Zealand, where authorities have more options to implement legally binding measures to compel improvements. So if you don't comply the first time, you might get a piece of advice, and they will come back again. Officers will come back again. They have the option to fine you if you still don't comply before escalation to arrest. We are also concerned with hoarders and shelter legislation. We are concerned because these are cases where there are large numbers of animals being kept, and this is the case where I was talking about in February 2014, where there were 75 live dogs and 20 dog carcasses were found unattended in a village house. In this case, this is the lady who was given 160 hours of community service. We also are recommending regulating grooming parlors, animal trainers, and animal boarding more extensively. I keep forgetting, sorry. A member of public brought his dog for grooming at a grooming parlor, and the boss, who had previously been convicted of animal cruelty, and he did illegal surgery, and he did some surgery on the dog's ear, and he was actually convicted of performing illegal surgery and possession of controlled drugs without a license, but not animal cruelty. We do not know why. And also the earlier case where we have a lot of new businesses, so dog trainers, they might not operate in a premise. We also feel that, these new sorts of businesses, like, other presenters have mentioned, dog trainers, mobile zoos, consider regulating providers. And also, we also have a lot of new businesses like cat cafes, which are currently not subject to legislation or licensing. We also have a problem with we also want to recommend regulating traps and cruel devices. We would like to recommend the sale and possession of cruel trapping devices, including electric collars, should be prohibited, like glue traps, like you can see with this bird. We find a lot of animals, including hamsters, cats, squirrels, birds, accidentally trapped. They become very stressed and they struggle, and especially for fragile animals like birds, they lose feathers and they can die due to stress as we try to rescue them. We also have a problem with poisoning on the right, on the top right corner. That's what poison usually looks like. That's one of the victims. It's a difficult problem for us because SPCA gets many hotline calls regarding suspected poisonings when people find dead animals and suspicion, like frothing at the mouth, some bleeding. But the conviction rate is low, and only 2 out of the 59 cases were prosecuted purely because the person admitted. So in Hong Kong, it's not easy to prove, and it's very, very hard to find the perpetrator. So one of our recommendations is to introduce a new offense where administering a poison to an animal or possession of poisons in a public place without a reasonable excuse is an offense. One more thing that we find quite common for rescue is falling from a height. I don't have any pictures here, but We had 9 cases where animals were thrown or they fell from a height. Most of them were killed on impact. Hong Kong is a very, we all live in a lot of tall buildings. We found that police might not pursue the case that was considered an accident, but due to the frequency of the studies in the case and the daily encounters of animals that have fallen from high buildings, the introduction of a new offense would help to tell owners that they need to ensure they have a suitable and safe environment for their pets and the serious consequences of failing to do so. Okay, last 2. All right, we also want to recommend early release of animals and recovering costs. It's also important because on average, where the owner is the abuser or the animal has no owner, the animal has to be kept by the SPCA or held in custody, I guess, for about 5 months till the prosecution is resolved. In some years, SPCA can hold up to 100 animals from court cases alone. So there is an impact for us, for SPCA as well. So this long-term confinement is not good for animal welfare. It's extremely resource intensive. And with large cases, we see this with animal hoarders, animal breeders, and in the next case, which you can see the photos, for mercy release, which is something that we also see in Hong Kong. So this is when thousands of animals are released as acts of mercy, especially near the Buddha's birthday. It's mostly seafood, frogs, but we also get like red-eared sliders. These guys were actually dumped into the sea. We managed to get 300, but we do not know the original number. There's currently no mechanism to stop this behavior. Under new legislation, we have asked that releases be subject to enforcement through a permit system, if not outright banned. Okay, so I'm sorry I had to breeze through that, but if there is a paper published on this, so if you guys would like to read about it, there's the QR code. Thank you for your time and attention, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Indeed, very interesting. Thank you very much, Xu Ping, from the University of Hong Kong, sharing with us on typologies of animal abuse in Hong Kong. Definitely, it's happened everywhere around the world. It's every day, yes. So we need to tackle on the issues. They're very alarming issues indeed. And for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much once again.